We are living in interesting and turbulent times. A live-streamed, unprecedented genocide has just ended on paper with the Gaza ceasefire being announced on the 3rd of October 2025. But in effect, international aid continues to be blocked from reaching Gaza. So it does continue to some extent. With this, considering this in the background, the formalization of the Gaza peace plan has also started, with the US playing a central role in it. Just recently, at a summit in Egypt, where Turkey, Qatar, US, and Egypt sort of got together to start formalizing the peace plan, an interesting moment occurred where the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was at an international stage and he spoke to the audience. Now, if you look up images of this moment, he's standing, and interestingly, just like a few steps behind him is President Donald Trump. And he's kind of looking at Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif with this kind of agreement in his kind of expression, and he's like looking at him and focusing on him. So while the optics of this are interesting, even more interesting are the consequences of this. What does this posturing mean? There's a newly emerging US-Pakistan warming up of relations. But is this actually going to advantage Pakistan, or are we going to compromise something with this new relation? As the global international stage changes entirely and we see a new global emerging order, where does Pakistan stand in that? These are some of the questions we want to explore in episode 5 of Unpacking Pakistan. And I'd like to welcome you to the episode. And I'd like to welcome 3 of my panelist guests, all of whom are some of our brilliant political science faculty. So I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Asma, Dr. Anam, and Dr. Yunus. I'll just introduce them and then we will move on. Dr. Asma Faiz is Associate Professor of Political Science at LUMS. She is the author of the book In Search of Lost Glory, Sindhi Nationalism in Pakistan. She is the recipient of many fellowships, including the Campus France Fellowship and the prestigious Charles Wallace Fellowship for Pakistan in 2025. Thank you so much, Asma, for being here.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Our second guest is Dr. Anam Qureshi, an assistant professor at LUMS. She is an associate fellow at the Institute of Development and Economic Alternatives, IDEAS. Her book, Towards a New Paradigm on Post-Truth, argues that we should go beyond the dichotomy of facts versus lies and offers a novel way of analyzing post-truth as a discourse in itself. Welcome, Dr. Anam.
Thank you for inviting me.
Our third guest is Dr. Yunus Server, who is an assistant professor at LUMS. He has taught at Georgia State University and the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs. His research and teaching interests focus on theorizing international politics, with a particular focus on greater power politics and the foreign policy of middle powers, with a regional focus on the Middle East, particularly Turkey and Iran. Welcome, Dr. Yunus.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with this question, Asma, and I'll start with you. I remember the last time you were here, it was our first episode of Unpacking Pakistan, and it was that moment before President Donald Trump was going to be elected the president, right? And now we see these very interesting moments where our Chief of Army Staff is visiting the White House, and the first time he visits, it's without the Prime Minister, right? And it's completely unprecedented to see the Field Marshal go and visit without a civilian head of state present. What is this relationship really about? What's really going on? We can all see in the headlines, and there's lots of analysis. What are the factors at play here? That's my first question. And just linked with that is this situational and momentary? Is it just transactional, or is this something that can be sustainable?
Yes. Thank you. And I remember that it's about 13 months ago that we did that podcast when Donald Trump was just about entering the White House, and what a changed landscape we find ourselves in, essentially. So definitely in the last 6 months or so, there has been a very warming up of relationship between Pakistan and the US. And this is a remarkable contrast from what happened in the previous 4 years of Biden administration. And there were a lot of factors. US was not interested in Pakistan. Then if you remember, for instance, the change of government in Pakistan, the vote of no confidence against the PTI government, and then the PTI, developed a narrative that it had something to do with the US, the cipher, absolutely not, all those things. So that definitely did not win Pakistan any friends in Washington, DC. But this year has been very interesting. Because as per the Pakistani accounts and as per the US accounts, the limited war that India and Pakistan fought in May, that ultimately came to a halt because of the direct US intervention, which the Indian government keeps on denying. But Pakistan is also very happy about it. Pakistan seemed to win the perceptions war. Out of that, that sort of brought out the fact that Pakistan, its Chinese missiles were able to take down Western technologies, but also that I think Pakistan's strategic military profile went up.
Yeah.
Because Pakistan appeared to do very well in war against India, which doesn't always happen. So in that case, this was an anomaly. Then also, Pakistan seems to have been, you're absolutely right about the fact that Field Marshal Asim Munir visiting White House in a one-on-one capacity. So that has happened in the past, because we remember Ziaul Haq going and meeting Ronald Reagan, then Pervez Musharraf, at the peak of his powers, being invited to Camp David, actually. So Pakistani leaders generally do not get invited to Camp David, but he got invited to Camp David because the war on terrorism was going on, and US-Pakistan strategic relationship was at its peak at that particular point. Nevertheless, never in a civilian rule time period. So we all know that this is a hybrid period, but we do have de jure democracy. So for a military chief, field marshal, to be invited, it showed that US had strategic interests in its plans. And of course, my colleague Yunus is here, who will talk a lot more about Middle East, but we generally see that Pakistan has signed a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, and then Mohammed bin Sulaiman also has been invited as a very special guest to the White House just about 2 weeks ago. So there is a kind of a strategic cooperation that is going on between Pakistan and the US, and this is a very far cry from what happened 2018 to 2020 to 24, Joe Biden administration. I also have to say that historically, US has wanted to hyphenate India-Pakistan relations. It's hyphenation of its South Asia policy. And India generally has not been very happy about it.
Can you explain what this hyphenation means?
So basically that US will try to, during the Cold War, for the longest time, Pakistan was in the American camp and India either was non-aligned officially, but from 69 onwards, it was in the Russian camp. So then the post-Cold War period comes up and India emerges as this big economy. So a kind of a paradigm shift, takes place in the American foreign policy, that they will be dealing with both powers. There is India, there is Pakistan. They mean different things and they bring different things to the table for the US. But Pakistan's isolation was when Bill Clinton visited South Asia. So he spent like 6 days in India and 10 hours in Pakistan. And that was the official reason, was that it is because Pakistan had just had it was the first year of martial law, Musharraf martial law. So because of that we don't want to be seen with a military dictator. The same military dictator was later on invited to the Camp David also, because the 9/11 had happened. So now US has wanted to establish its parallel relations. There is also a feeling that US would like Pakistan to be like an important strategic player because of our location once again also. This is something that we read about in Pakistan studies books.
Yes.
There's a very critical strategic location. So we are at the crossroads of Central Asia and Middle East. And of course, Yunus will say more about this, but Middle East used to be dominated by two hegemons, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Iran has been, with what has happened related to Gaza, Israel's attacks, etc. In some sense, Saudi Arabia appears to be a kind of a sole regional hegemon or a regional hegemon in the making. But they have a problem as far as military capacity is concerned.
That's where Pakistan comes in.
Defense pact comes in. So and we have almost put a collective security type of assumption within it. Like an attack on one will be considered as an attack on the other one as well. So we're living through interesting times. It is very much a pragmatic relationship. It's not an ideological relationship. It is also not a relationship which goes to soft power economy, people to people contact. In some sense,
it doesn't transcend to any people.
Geostrategic military capacities. As they say, that enjoy while it lasts.
Yes. And let's see how long that lasts.
Yes.
Yeah. But while we're on strategic relationships and alliances that are arising out of a particular political moment, I've also been noticing, and a big thing, another interesting parallel that's kind of emerging here is just recently the Afghan Taliban Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi visited New Delhi. And he was in India for a whole week of talks. This was a really, really big thing that's happened. And there was a joint statement that was made in which Kashmir was referred to as a part of India, right? And of course, Pakistan found this extremely offensive. And since then, there's been that kind of back and forth. What does, I want to ask you, Yunus, and the question is, of course, also open to you, Anam, and the rest. What does Afghanistan taking this position at this time really mean? Are we looking at a kind of like similar strategic alliance? And what is really driving this reversal of this decades-old kind of solidarity in this moment where it takes this open stance against Pakistan?
So recently, when Taliban took over power after America's withdrawal, so we have had the relationship of Pakistan with Afghan Taliban turn very sour. So, and we have been trying different tactics on both sides of the border to up the ante or to increase the bargaining leverage. So, Afghan Taliban's reluctance to go against TTP on the side of Afghanistan, as well as Pakistan's bid to close borders, close economic ties, as well as Pakistan's use of Pakistan's negotiation with other elements, non-Afghan Taliban elements, Northern Alliance, and some other religious fragments that are not in good relationship with the Afghan Taliban. So this can be seen as the response to these movements over the past 3 years, that Afghan Taliban are increasing their bargaining leverage, that, look, we have other options too. Meaning that in conventional settings, in any scenario of conventional warfare, Pakistan cannot accommodate two war fronts. So and as well as besides that, like if India attacks Pakistan, and at the same time, if Taliban engage Pakistani military on the western border, this would be a very precarious situation for Pakistan. On the other hand, Taliban, with their influence over TTP and other militant factions inside Pakistan, they can impose costs on Pakistan through internal security challenges. So more recently, around the same time when Pakistan was negotiating with Afghan Taliban in Turkey, an attack was launched in Islamabad. Although it was not accepted, responsibility was not accepted by TTP, a splinter group accepted the responsibility, but that was a clear message to the Pakistani state regarding the operational ceiling of the militant infrastructure inside Pakistan, as well as how deeply they have already penetrated, that they can attack Islamabad, one of the most guarded places in the country. So these tensions are reflected in moves from both sides to increase the bargaining leverage.
Okay.
So what should happen that Pakistan and Afghanistan, since they are neighbors, Afghanistan is largely dependent on Pakistan for economic resources. They are a landlocked country, so they need, recently a report came out that just the cement prices, they were doubled during the last 3 weeks because of Afghanistan's dependence on Pakistan for different economic resources. Besides that, in the broader geopolitical landscape and the rise of Hindutva regime in India, Afghanistan cannot fully trust Indian government and for its security needs, for its geopolitical needs. So both the countries need to realize that there is a common ground that they can reach to, and the issues are, although they are very complicated, but they are not intractable. They can be resolved, negotiations, a kind of accord could be achieved. So, but it requires political will on both sides, as well as trust, which has been lacking during the past.
Trust, yeah, exactly. There's no trust, right? And the handling of the refugee situation, how much of that has played into this?
So as I mentioned earlier, that this was another tactic by Pakistan to increase the bargaining leverage. So we're going to send these refugees back. You will have to deal with this problem. So if you don't agree to what we are asking you to do, so we would do this. So both the countries have been trying to maximize their leverage using different diplomatic, political, economic tools that they have. So, and the return of Afghan refugees was one example of that.
Okay, yeah. So, of course, I'm thinking about this, and this brings us to one of the things we wanted to talk about in this entire episode is how does all of this tie into what's happening internally in Pakistan, right? How do we go beyond that macro level, international stage? And if we turn to local sort of domestic politics within Pakistan, something that happened recently is, and of course, always politics pervades the personal and it comes into our lives and our homes. As a mom, so my son is 5-year-old, and every winter, me and all my friends are always talking about how the schools are going to be closed down, due to smog. So we were talking about this and we're all dreading this and we're like, acha bas ab schools band hone lage. But then even before that happens, there's a complete disruption of internal peace with lots of rumors flying around that schools are going to be closed down because of not smog, but a different kind of political event, which is a TLP protest. And it gathers momentum at Murid case, and eventually Section 144 is imposed in Punjab. It turns into this very volatile kind of situation. And what's, of course, troubling about it is that this political party can cause this kind of rupture in peace. It can cause the government to impose this. It can cause all these rumors, and it disrupts that peace. It affects the economy. It affects everything, right? So, Anam, a lot of your research is also on disinformation, and I want to ask you, and broader also, but about this party also, about TLP, what are the factors that you think have led to them being able to mobilize people in this way, to time and again come to a point where the state is kind of negotiating with them, and eventually this time then they took this big step. What is the background of this? How has this party risen and how has it been successful?
I think we need to go back a little bit in history as well when we try to understand why such political parties are able to entrench in society. And I think the inception of Pakistan always came with this identity crisis revolving around religion, revolving around Islam. And time and again, we've seen different political parties over the years where they have used the rhetoric of religion in order to mobilize people. And I think more recently, not that violent, but also if you talk about PTI and the idea of Riyasat-e-Medina, again, that normalization of discourse that started to take place where we put Islam and an Islamic state as the solution to all corruption that's there. So the division that we're trying to create as well with who the people are and who are we fighting against, or what is the elite or the corrupt elite in this case. With TLP, we see an extreme version of that where it emerged out of blasphemy politics, so like the assassination of Salman Taseer, and who questioned blasphemy laws in the country. And his assassination led to the creation of TLP, and religion being one of those identity markers that it's so easy to use to mobilize anyone, whether it be someone who's actually well informed about what Islam is, or just the idea of, this is an attack on the Prophet in a way, right? And once you reach that point, that's where it's very difficult to then come back from it, because then the aspect which is mobilizing people is not necessarily the rhetoric, but it's like, what's the association with a particular, like, what does that religion mean for you? How much do you actually, what are you willing to do for it? And TLP has been very successful in garnering support. They have a huge digital presence as well. And I think in more recent times, that plays a part. Like, we are looking at social media where many people are just living in echo chambers. You're surrounded by very similar voices as well. So with a political party that is able to have a digital presence as well, where it has that capacity, because they know they have the leverage, right? The leverage being religion, that we have the leverage where we can actually ask people to come out in support of that religion, because you're defending the religion, you're not defending anything else at that point. And so with this particular protest was, of course, in solidarity with Gaza, the ceasefire and all of that.
This said it's about. So was that what it was about?
The surprising thing is because we have seen protests with regards to Gaza happening across the world at different periods, and this supposedly came after a ceasefire had been reached. And so it was odd in a sense of why are we mobilizing in support of Palestine once we've somewhat, of course there's criticisms to whether that was a good deal or not or anything, but it was not against we still are fighting for it. It's okay, ceasefire has been reached, and that has been the aim for many of the global protests that are taking place. So, and here again, then it's that idea of it's the notion of moral Islamism that comes into play as well, that we are the solidarity that we are able to amass with the use of Islam. And then it's it's not just, and it expands then, right? So it's not just the people of Pakistan who are doing it, because it's the bigger banner being we're defending the religion, right? And TLP, and I think the problem with TLP, specifically in politics, has been this combination of mobilization and vigilantism. And vigilantism has been a case with more prominently being used by this political party in its association with the blasphemy laws. And I think that's where the problem also starts, right? Because the way that the laws are there, the fact that you can't actually have a debate about it either, that you mention it, it will result in mob violence.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry, and ask you can you define for our audience what vigilantism is exactly?
It's basically where individuals or the public would come out to take the role of an authority or a coercive power. So it's not the state, for instance, who has the monopoly over legitimate violence. Individuals think that they also have that authority, and that they can do it if they see a crime happening, that they have for some reason, that authority that they need to stop it, right? And so you are actually, by doing that, also diminishing the role of the state. And so in situations like Muridke, where you are aware that there is a political party that actively uses violence even during their protest or mobilization, what does their state do? Or what role does the state have to prevent it? Because it's more about, yes, you have a right to peaceful protest, but you do not have a right to harm infrastructure. You don't have the right to harm other individuals in the proceedings of that protest. And so you start off with, okay, let's implement a Section 144. And that's because we know that there might be an incident, given the history, that there might be the case where this could result in violence, because this is the way to go about them. Causing disruption, causing that. And it has to go with, and at some point we need to start questioning as well, what is it about TLP's rhetoric? Whether it's just the defending Islam, defending Prophet, peace be upon him, what is it that's really motivating them? And how does that connect to then the spread of disinformation or rumors through social media, where it gets amplified as well, right? So that intertwining of emotions that come with defending the honor of the Prophet, with defending a religion as being more superior than anything else, where it's you can die for it, you can fight for it. The combination of all of those things, where when we look at people who are participating in these protests as well, who are supporting this as well, the extent to which they are engaged just by the mere factor of how we are fighting for Islam in a way, right? And that's who we are. And I think that's going back to when we talk about Pakistan's identity crisis with regards to being an Islamic state as well, what Islam means, how it's been used in politics. TLP has been able to just bankroll
pick up from that
and say Islam is who we are, right? As Muslims, that's something that's the most important identity that we have.
Absolutely. And Asma, is there something to add on this?
Yeah, I absolutely 200% agree with, how like Anam has framed and, given the context. I just wanted to say that in terms of TLP, because generally the Barelvi groups and parties were not politically mobilized. So if you go back 20 years to the early 2000s post 9/11 discourse, so the Deobandi versus Barelvi, the divide was there. Yeah. But the Taliban are the Deobandis. So the Taliban minister Mullah Muttaqi, after meeting, or in addition to meeting the government officials in India, went to Darul Uloom Deobandiya.
So interesting.
Because that is the nursery where this is all started in some sense. So, but this Deobandi Barelvi cleavage, once 9/11 happened, then 2004 onwards, suicide attacks started to happen. Then Sunni Tehreek, which was the precursor in some sense to the TLP, they started to become mobilized because the Deobandis were targeting them also. For them, this was not a good Islam. So you can say this was a factional fight also, this was an ideological fight, this was a tough war also in some sense. So there was this very aggrieved shrine going, and the impression was that this is a very peace-loving side of Islam, essentially. Tahirul Qadri aate the, wo bhi isko promote वगैरह करते थे, global ek image tha. And then, there were some horrific attacks against, Sunni rallies. Yes. There was this very famous attack at the Sunni Tehreek leadership in Karachi at Eid Miladun Nabi. And after that, then, there was already that resentment coming within the Barelvis also.
It was there.
And all you needed was, unfortunately, a hero, which became Mumtaz Qadri.
Which they got. Yes, exactly. And now after him, yes, please.
So, Anam just referred to the idea of history of the use of religion in Pakistan. So, I want to build on that Pakistan is suffering from some inherent internal contradictions. And one of them being, at the time of independence and over time, our constitutional arrangements put Islam at the very center of our constitutional structure, our distribution of power within the country. So but when you look at the de facto distribution of power, so state exists in two dimensions. One is where state is like any other administrative authority, any other political authority in the world. And on the other hand, state has used this idea that Pakistan is an Islamic state, sovereignty belongs to God and no other earthly power. But in reality, sovereignty belongs to a particular institution in the country. So this inherent contradiction, while allows for political parties to use religious rhetoric and to maximize their popular support base in the country, and over time, state has resorted for different political reasons to amplify those religious discourses for a variety of short-term and long-term political reasons. So, but that contradiction allows for different, not just TLP, but other political parties as well. The religious parties enjoy more street power than any other political parties in the country. People are willing to risk their lives. People are willing to come out on streets and protest and incur costs as well. So, in my opinion, it goes back to the internal contradiction of the country that a country is plagued with.
That haven't been resolved. No. I think, you're exactly, absolutely right. And I think this reflects on how TLP secured 2.2 million votes in the 2018 elections, and it came out as the fifth largest party countrywide. And then in 2024, there are 2.9 million votes. And I think dono times pe, it was almost like the recognition that this could have been like a swing party that could have swung it one way or the other was a huge recognition. Right? I have a follow-up question on this, which I was going to ask later, but I think while we're on this, I'm generally very curious about this as well. In the first episode, we talked a lot about populism. And at that time, what we were talking about was how Donald Trump, but also various other far-right movements in the world, the face of populism, how it's similar in different places that's happening around the world. And there's this wave of populism. I was discussing this with friends also. If TLP is able to, let's say, mobilize street power in this way, and if so many far-right movements around the world do exactly a similar thing, they mobilize street power, and that's how they're becoming successful, can we regard this as a populist party? What is the face of populism in Pakistan? This is sort of what I'm thinking about. Because, of course, when PTI came and when we saw the entire tenure, the rhetoric was that the rise of Imran Khan, he is the populist leader, right? This is exactly how populism works. He's charismatic, etc. What is the version or iteration or like local variant of populism that we're seeing here? What's specific to it or different from other faces of populism in the West? And this is for everyone.
I can take a stab at it. The religious populism, I think, like very simply put, is that what's happening because we're looking at this dichotomy between who the elite is and who the people are, right? And so we're looking at moral Islamism against corruption. And so corruption, the other being the elite, and TLP actually also the ability of the party to gain such high number of seats in elections goes on to say of like, because the parallels that we draw with Imran Khan being a populist leader, because he's also a person who's advocating for the people. So it's the emphasis being on who the people is and how do we identify that collective shared identity with TLP, that shared identity or that desire to be a prosperous for the welfare of the people lies with moral Islamism, right? Like that being the end or a means to an end of corruption, which is very different from PTI talking about removal of the corrupt elite. But in somewhat similar manners, with the notion of Riyasat-e-Medina, we see that happening, but it's a more a damper version of the same thing. So there are tenets of religious populism that are very much present in both to an extent. When you start talking about the state structures as well, right? The only difference with PTI, of course, is not just the Riyasat-e-Medina, it's the notion or the desire for creating a new Pakistan, like Naya Pakistan kya hai? One nation kya hai? And usme we see, usme thodi differences aa jate hain, because that's not necessarily, it's not as vocal as TLP saying कि हमें एक Islamic state चाहिए, and the understanding of it being very adherent to Sharia law. Imran Khan tries to sway away from it and talks about making Pakistan great again, right? Or the idea of how, and it reflects back, like Allama Iqbal's rhetoric comes into play as well when during the independence, where it was like we're creating Pakistan, where it's a Muslim, it's a land where you can practice your religion, where Muslims would be prioritized, you can practice your cultures and values, and it's for the citizens that's there.
Religion center stage in that, the creation of that.
And then the nationalist sentiment that Imran Khan then also puts about what this new Pakistan could look like. It could look like Riyasat-e-Medina, that's what we're aiming for, but it's where there is no corrupt elite, right? The dynastic politics is what he's against. The incumbent, incompetent politicians is what he's against. With TLP, the focus is primarily on moral Islamism in a way.
Yeah, and I remember reading an article which I found very interesting, which was that TLP is the poor man's PTI, in some sense. Because there's a very emotional rhetoric at work. Nobody does emotions better. And the sense of feeling that your nation is in danger, your republic is in danger, your religion is in danger, even though you are the majority religious community in the country, etc. And in that sense, TLP, PTI, they have all been, very successfully marketing and branding out this kind of narrative. And essentially, I just wanted to say, because you also asked that what kind of populism do we have? I mean, of course, we need to see, because what has happened since 9th May 2023 onwards, a lot has changed. PTI leadership is also, quite a few of them, including Imran Khan himself, are behind the bars. They are not active. But nevertheless, there is a particular type of politics that they have been doing. And in some sense, it's very similar to global populism. It is, we are living through an age of right-wing, religion-inspired nationalism, where Muslims of Pakistan, Hindus of India, white Americans, Christian Americans in the US, they think that they are somehow some kind of minority which is facing extinction. So that is also that you have to know that politicians are the best salesmen, because they sell you these dreams of glory.
Yes, I'm thinking of Zohran Mamdani as you say that.
Yes.
Just recently, Bojo Pura tha, the Trump and his meeting.
Yes.
What was the commonality? It was the anti-elite thing.
Yes.
There is a commonality there as well.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Even though I do like to believe that Zohran Mamdani is in a different league than Donald Trump, essentially. But I also then just wanted to say that there is a certain kind of crisis narrative. Because, like when we're looking at election campaigns, so you have non-populist parties. And for the last 20 years, look at Europe, far right, look at the US, India, Pakistan. Populists are very good at, selling crisis and projecting themselves as managers of crisis. If you did not, this is a make or break election. If you did not vote for us, everything will crumble, your life will fall apart. Something like that. So that crisis, that urgency.
Which is how blasphemy politics also works.
Yeah, and also the promise of emancipation. You will be rid of all of your life's problems. There is a life made easy kind of handbook which comes out
Anam
of
said, corruption also falls into that. We'll be done with this elite that has been corrupt, these horrible corrupt politicians.
Yeah. Even though we all work in a university which is not even that big, we know that even fixing a university, let's say if someone wants
it's not
to
a one-stop.
Real life problems are very complex, but there is an oversimplification and there is a catchy narrative and there is an attachment with religion, and then you are able to attract masses behind you.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've been making notes, and I think what you said with religious nationalism, the religion element being at the root of it, and also oversimplification and crisis narratives, I want to kind of hold on to this. I want to shift a little bit. So constantly when we were also kind of conceptualizing this episode and thinking about it, we were thinking about what's happening within Pakistan and what's happening internationally and how do these two things link, right? I'm thinking about Pakistan's foreign policy at a moment like this, right? If we again look back at the international stage and we look at India, China, US, the US, Russia, and all those changing dynamics, how can Pakistan, what kind of foreign policy do we need at this time when we have these security concerns, and later we're going to come to our hybrid regime, and of course the big elephant in the room right now is the 27th Amendment, which we need to talk about, so we're going to come to that. But how can Pakistan kind of leverage its position, and maybe Yunus, you can, I'd like to hear from you about this, with foreign policy and generally with kind of regional balance of power?
So before I respond to your question, I would like to add on the idea of populism.
Please, yeah.
First, so for me, populism is a symptom rather than a problem. So populism is a symptomatic expression of underlying socio-economic and political dichotomies. For example, the rise of Trump in the United States was largely accompanied by relocation of manufacturing industry from the Midwest of the country. So, and Trump was able to maximize support base in those regions where people incur the cost of relocation of manufacturing industry to other parts of the world. Similarly, in case of Pakistan, elite capture, elite control of the economic, social, and political systems is a reality. And the system as it stands now, in terms of the economic organization of the society as well as political organization of the society, it is devoid of any popular representation. So then what happens is, as Asma mentioned, that these salesmen, they capitalize on those dichotomies and they create this narrative of being saviors of the people. So, and they put elite against the people, and then they use whatever sells better. For example, in case of Pakistan, religion, the idea of Riyasat-e-Medina, as well as TLP's idea of saving the honor, protecting the honor of Prophet. So because it sells better, because people are socialized in a particular environment where religion is seen as panacea to all the illnesses that society suffers from. So it's underlying economic and political dichotomy that then creates the conditions conducive for these political salesmen to capitalize on and maximize their support. So now I'll come back to your original question. So I think the structural transition that unfolded at the global stage after the 2008 financial crisis and the rise of China, the resurgence of Russia. So the structure is undergoing transition. And there is a sense that we may be heading towards multipolarity, but it's a fact that there is a growing competition and the system is undergoing transition. It could end with multipolarity, unipolarity, or bipolarity, any kind of configuration. But the point remains that we are undergoing structural transition.
For our non-pol-sci viewers, what is multipolarity?
Where you have multiple centers of power. For example, in contemporary scenario, if you have Russia on one hand, if you have China on another, and the US, so it would be considered multipolarity. Bipolarity means the two centers of power. So this kind of creates very favorable conditions for middle powers, like Pakistan, like Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, to maximize their sphere of influence. Because the great powers, they are competing against each other, and they are focusing on containing the influence of their competing great powers. So at this point, middle powers can not only expand their sphere of influence, but maximize their own strength. So they can hedge their bets, they can extract benefits from all centers of power. So I think we have come to a point where we have this realization that structure offers us certain favorable conditions. However, we are still late on that. For example, Turkey's diplomacy vis-a-vis Russia-Ukraine war, it's very interesting. So it kind of tells you that in case of Russia and Ukraine, you have two blocks or two competing great powers confronting each other, Russia being one and the Western bloc on the other hand. But Turkey has been supplying weapons to Ukraine, as well as at the same time entering into defense deals with Russia. So they have been mediating at the same point. They were hosting negotiations as well. And at the same time, they were selling weapons to both the countries. So that is the extent of leverage that middle powers could acquire and capitalize on during these moments of structural transition. So we have now come to a point where there is a sense that we realize that there are structural opportunities. However, it still seems, our foreign policy still seems very transactional and ad hoc. It is driven by events and not by a long-term geopolitical vision.
You said our foreign policy seems transactional
and ad hoc. So we are responding to certain events. We are not creating opportunities for ourselves. Instead, we are simply entering into transactional relationships devoid of any long-term strategic or geopolitical vision. So, and that's my opinion, that in order to have a foreign policy that is more efficient and more productive, we need to have a long-term geopolitical vision of where we want to see Pakistan in the broader geopolitical context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that ties back to the first question we opened with, which was the US-Pakistan relation also being transactional or situational. Does that fall into the same kind of logic?
So the US-Pakistan relationship, it's a reflection of the change of mindset in Washington. So Marco Rubio, during the second month of the Trump administration, he delivered a speech where he said, we are entering into a multipolar world, where world will be divided into different spheres of influence. So we will focus on what we have and what we can potentially control without overstretching our power and our resources. So that is a kind of a demonstration of what Washington thinks in terms of broader geopolitical competition between China and US. So previously under Obama administration and Biden administration, Indo-Pacific took a lot of attention. So, and that's why India became very important, because the US was trying to carve a competing bloc in the Indo-Pacific region against China to contain its growing influence. However, the current administration has altered their approach. Now they see that Indo-Pacific approach is an overstretch of their resources as well as their power. So, and that is where Pakistan becomes very important, because they think that we cannot enter into another war in the Middle East, so we need to solidify the geopolitical architecture in the Middle East by moving forward with the Abraham Accords, and that's where Pakistan becomes very important. So it's not China, rather it's maintaining a control over Middle Eastern region and at the same time solidifying its hegemonic position in the Middle East. So that is why we see this warming of relationship between the two countries over the past few months. But that is why, like during the peace conference in Egypt, we kind of indicated our willingness to even send troops to Gaza. So I know we're going to talk about this at the later point about the Abraham Accords and the broader Middle Eastern security architecture. But the fact remains that this warming up of relationship is a reflection of change in mindset of Washington.
Yes, and I'm going to come back to that at the end. So we've been discussing the regional and international geopolitical landscape. Asma, I want to come back to the domestic political landscape. Everyone is talking about it. Abhi 27th Amendment hui and there's conversation about the 28th Amendment, right? So can you unpack this moment for us? What is really happening with our domestic political landscape? Where does Pakistan stand right now when the 27th Amendment has happened?
I think in some sense, so we have all known that for a while, Pakistan has been operating in a hybrid sort of environment. It's the degree of hybridity that has differed. So the previous government of PTI, they actually coined in one of the speeches the word that we are on the same page. And then the others do not, even if they don't say that they are on the same page, this is a very, very same page kind of an arrangement.
Equation.
So in some sense, we have been moving in this direction and we're not the only ones. There is generally a greater trend towards less democratization and more autocratization all over the world. Different, political projects, different data sets, Freedom House, they all explain it. In case of Pakistan, where I think 2025 is different from 2000, especially post-India-Pakistan war, hence all the conspiracy theories also that surround it as to why did the war happen. But we see that the government, ruling dispensation and the military establishment, they look a lot more comfortably placed. There's a certain kind of, there is definitely greater international engagement with them since the May conflict. Arab states are also interacting. China has been our ally. Chinese were very happy with the performance of the Chinese-made technology, which impressed and scared the Western powers also. So, and plus we had this whole post-election fallout. Who has the reserve seats?
Yes.
That reserve seat case and petitions went on and on forever. Then so the government generally, the executive has not been happy with the judiciary because they feel that the judiciary has been giving decisions which have not been favorable to them. And they have come out with narratives like that. So we saw this in 26th Amendment as well, that there was a separate constitutional bench being built. But that was one step behind the 27th Amendment because that constitutional bench was still part of the Supreme Court. This is in some sense a kind of an executive coup which has been done via the 27th Amendment. And we go back to the Al-Jihad Trust case 1996. It was the Benazir Bhutto government, and where a kind of a de jure separation of powers was being established. Also, we also know that when politics actually takes place in Pakistan, things are very, fuzzy. Everybody is crossing their institutional boundaries, essentially. You get prime ministers who, like Yusuf Raza Gilani, being dismissed by Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry, etc. So the executive finally decided that the parliament, at least theoretically speaking, is going to be the supreme actor. So change the process of appointment of judges to the Supreme Court, which is the most important thing, number one, about this 27th Amendment. Because now judges no longer have the majority in the Judicial Council of Pakistan. And most importantly, the Federal Constitutional Court is no longer part of Supreme Court. It is a parallel institution and Supreme Court has become a kind of an appellate body. So they can only hear the appeals on it. So which is why we saw, it is huge, and that is why we had, some fascinating commentary by legal expert scholars who said that Supreme Court, there is nothing about Supreme Court right now after this. Lekin we need to see how things develop. And the other thing, of course, was of the immunity for president. Again, this is also a president who has had those Swiss bank account cases. Yusuf Raza Gilani was actually dismissed because he wasn't taking the case forward, at least in de jure terms, at least in official terms. And then, of course, there is this whole thing about military, also kind of a unification of command.
Yes, and very explicit. And
Yes. And Field Marshal, who had already gotten an extension for 5 years, but that has been kind of enshrined and solidified through this amendment. So of course we have seen, all of us and our audience have seen the kind of then reaction that has come from human rights organizations, HRCP, Amnesty International, etc. Certainly this is going to create more problems if we want to create a system or want to enjoy a system of accountability and equality before law. But this is a very important amendment, and we wait to see. My own, again, you can never predict, turn in politics. Who would have thought that we all remember that once Donald Trump initially came in power, so one of the advisors, or it was just about him, just before him taking oath, that one of the advisors started tweeting about Pakistan's opposition. And then Zalmi Khalilzad was also tweeting about Pakistan opposition.
At that time.
And then having the chief of army staff as one-on-one.
Go and visit.
Let's share a meal together at the White House, So politics changes very quickly. So never be too sure, but I get a feeling because the whole separate, the reserve seat saga, there is now a majority in parliament with the ruling dispensation. If they go too far in cutting down NFC award, People's Party will not cooperate beyond. They have said this is their red line. But if they can keep People's Party on board, then maybe towards the end of this tenure of this government, they might go for 28th Amendment.
It could happen actually.
Down the road.
But down the road. And various factors on pe depend karega. I'm coming back for a moment again to the Middle East. And I'm thinking about, so after the whole, of course, Israel-Palestine war and considering the Abrahamic Accords also, how can peace be, this kind of security architecture, jo itna zyada rupture ho gaya in the Middle East again and again with various conflicts, how can it be built back up? What do you think when you look at the Middle East? Are sort of key steps or key movements? Is it going to happen at the international body level? Are there other things? How can the future of the Middle East become better?
So, more recently, since 2020, since the October the 7th attack, Israel has achieved a certain sense of a regional superiority in the region. For example, Israel controlled the skies, Iranian skies, during the Iran-Israel war. So there were costs imposed on Israel as well, but the superiority, the military superiority and technological superiority, as well as intelligence superiority, was very much evident during that episode. Besides that, Israel regularly carries out attacks in Syria, regularly attacks Lebanon, and also Yemen.
Iran.
And they went as far as to attack Qatar. So Israel has achieved, in terms of military, Israel is already way superior than other countries in the region. In terms of economic strength, Israel is also way ahead of, in terms of technological superiority and the broader growth of economy. They match the potential of other countries in the region. So, and this should be seen as, by the logic of balance of power, the other countries should come together to balance against the Israeli superiority or Israel's ascendance to the role of regional hegemon. But what's happening defies that logic, is that the other countries are coming together, normalizing relationship with Israel through Abraham Accords, and that would in ways solidify the hegemonic character of the Israel in the region. So this is where it gets very important, and it gets very consequential. That Israel is not ready to accept Turkey's role in Syria. So even earlier today and yesterday, Israel carried out attack in different southern regions of very close to Damascus in Syria. So Israel is not accepting any independent governing body bordering Israel that could potentially threaten its territorial security. So, given what other Middle Eastern countries are responding to it, the way they are solidifying Israel's hegemony through Abraham Accords and through other means, it could be counterproductive for other countries. Why? Because of two reasons. One, the idea of Greater Israel.
The idea of?
Greater Israel.
Yeah.
So Israel is bent upon the idea of stretching its borders to Egypt, parts of Saudi Arabia, and this is no longer a fringe within Israeli politics.
Yeah.
Israeli mainstream regularly refers to the idea of Greater Israel controlling the Middle Eastern region. So, and secondly, the difference of objectives. Middle Eastern countries, especially the Arab countries, they are motivated by the economic logic. When they talk about Abraham Accords, they think of regional integration of economies, building up a new Europe in the Middle East. However, Israel is largely motivated by political and strategic reasons. And that's where it gets kind of tricky for the Arab countries, that whether they would be able to achieve their goals by normalizing relationship with the Israel. So technically, what should have happened, that countries should be balancing against Israel's ascendance.
That's not happening.
That's not happening. Yeah. Instead, U.S. is pushing other countries in the region to normalize relationship with Israel and solidify its hegemonic character. So coming back to the point of how Pakistan should navigate this moment of newly emerging security architecture in the region. So a regional hegemon which would not accept a stronger country at its borders or closer to the region is not a good sign for Pakistan. So if we become part of Abraham Accords along with other Arab countries, it would be a great threat to our security, internal as well as external security. Secondly, our commitment to sending troops to Gaza could also backfire. For example, what Israel could not achieve, the goal of disarming Hamas and demolishing the security and tunnel infrastructure of Hamas, the task is likely be given to this peace force. So this could result in some serious challenges for countries that would be sending their troops to Gaza. So that is also something that we haven't really thought through that what could be the consequences of sending troops to Gaza, because one of the goals remains disarming of Hamas, which Hamas wouldn't agree on through peaceful means. So in this broader geopolitical context, I think the better policy for the countries in the Arab world should be to balance against Israel rather than bandwagoning with Israel and appeasing Israel's territorial ambitions, which would threaten their own territorial integrity as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Absolutely, yeah. And the last thing, I think because we're short on time, I'm thinking about coming back to South Asia, and I'm thinking about revolutions that are happening across South Asia. And this is again open to all of you. We've spoken about the 27th Amendment. We've spoken about what happens when boundaries are completely breached. We've spoken about PTI and populism. So I'm thinking about the Bengali and Nepali uprisings particularly. And can we compare these other revolutions that are happening in South Asia to what's happening in Pakistan with the PTI, but also more broadly? Do we see those elements? Do we see a pushback from the people against when the state becomes or consolidates or imposes power in this way, or tries to, like what's just happened recently also, tries to no longer uphold those organs of the state and their separation?
There are some similarities, but there are a lot of differences as well, because we see how in Bangladesh or in Nepal, we would consider them as they were able to remove the executive in a way, right? They were successful in doing that. And the similarities, of course, with which also transcend towards Pakistan, remain. There was anger over corruption. You have the youth being disillusioned with politics as well. There is a lot of favoritism that's there, or nepotism and corruption. So that was the context in which, with Bangladesh, with the quotas that were for job quotas for Awami League families, with Nepal, of course, that asymmetry of inequality that was very much prevalent as well. Like you have a lot of wealthy children, a lot of wealth just concentrated within a set segment of the population. The rest of them are suffering. The banning of social media also then adds another layer. So, and then of course, I think so all of these aspects are the similarities that we see also in Pakistan, when there was this PTI actually talking about mobilizing against the removal of incumbent elite, or the removal of dynasticism. So that's where the parallels can be seen, right? Where it is trying to, or the youth actually, because the rhetoric, and I think it goes back to some of the earlier points about populism as well, or what it is and what it means. The reason why populism exists on both sides of the spectrum, right? So it's not only right-wing populism, there's also left-wing populism that is present. And what is the common ground for all of that is this idea of selling a desire-based rhetoric as well. Like, what is this identity that we are actually being sold? What is this identity that is being used to mobilize people? In Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Pakistan, we see that the fight against corruption, people being done with it, the youth where the government or the state is not really providing any welfare, is not providing benefits, or is not being held accountable. So that movement against corruption took root. The difference, however, which is a problem of why we don't see that happening in Pakistan, right? Because, and that's primarily because mobilization till date, despite PTI having that boom, mobilization till date is still along partisan lines. National solidarity is still very partisan. So when you talk about PTI becoming very popular, supporters of PTI are only supporters of PTI because PTI is able to give them this new Pakistan, right?
It's conditional.
And so it's conditional on that. That Naya Pakistan can only come with PTI being in power, right? So national एक solidarity जो होती है, वो exist ही नहीं करती है, which was very different जब हम बांग्लादेश की बात करते हैं और या हम नेपाल की बात करते हैं. When you talk about both of these instances, the entire population, like it started with student activism or student protest, but you had that national mobilization that took place where people came out on the streets because they're like, okay, this is the only way out. So it's not limited to partisanship anymore.
This one is tied to a party.
It is tied to a party, unfortunately, and that's why you don't see those revolutions being sustained or being successful in that manner.
Interesting, yeah. And last question, do you want to add?
I will add. So, as Anam mentioned, that state at this point, state of Pakistan is suffering, is facing a crisis of legitimacy.
Yeah.
It could be because of demographic changes, political awareness among people. So younger generations are more likely to question the elite capture, elite control, as well as the role of some institutions in terms of institutional overreach, as well as a kind of rise of patronage network. So all these lead to a crisis of legitimacy. So this crisis of legitimacy cannot be undone through this window dressing, through this kind of use of brute force, as well as through social control. So this requires the renewal of social contract. Because the younger generation that has access to social media, those who have traveled abroad, or like those who have seen the goods of the other political systems. So they see through the doubleness of the system, that constitutionally we are a political democracy, but in de facto terms, we are suffering from elite control, where people have literally no say in the decision making, in governance. So people are not represented. So to resolve this crisis of legitimacy, we need to, the state of the state needs to realize the extent of this crisis, the intensity of this crisis, and then reorganize the political and economic structure in ways that that is more representative of people. So unless we do that, we can only delay this, but we cannot resolve the underlying tension. And this would require kind of an overhauling of the system, economic as well as political.
Absolutely, no, I agree. And I've noted especially a renewal of the social contract, which is at the heart of it. Asma, I want to hear your thoughts, and I'm also going to ask the question जो मैंने जल्दी से तीनों से सबसे पूछना है कि okay, so this is the current situation. This is Pakistan's status as a democratic state. Is there something to be hopeful about? I want you to then say something about this also. Briefly, each of you, I'll come.
I mean, we are still in not a de jure legal martial law.
Yes. The final revolution
it's
has not
like
happened.
Something that is alien to us.
Yes.
तो वो बिल्कुल आराम हो भी सकता है.
वो भी हो सकता है आराम से हमने देखा
तो इसका
हुआ है.
मतलब है कि powers that be also have to craft ways,
consider everything,
and fix the system in order to continue to do what they would like to do in the country. So there is no 1999.
So you're saying they need to fix the system in order to continue to do what they need to do.
Yunus was also saying that there is a crisis of legitimacy. So the powers that be realize that they do not want to look illegitimate also, which is why hence all the elections and the courts and everything, because everything has to look legal and look constitutional. And of course there are problems within it, and as Yunus was saying it previously, Anam was talking about it too, that people also see through the cracks in the system. There is certainly there has been a need to overhaul Pakistan's political, economic structure. We initially talked about the pivotal role of religion, the way and the extent to which religion has been politicized. So I do think, because we did an episode last year also, that compared to like 13 months ago, the government and the military establishment seem far more comfortable. It's not, nobody is saying that necessarily, but they were in a much more precarious position. The opposition party was taking out long, in November was the last time, November 24. We are now at the end of November 2025. A year has passed since the last big protests also. So far it seems that for the moment they have some cushion in which they can actually operate. Of course, they would not be very happy with the kind of damning report that has come from IMF, etc. But through some things which have been outside their control, like, this bonanza, in legitimacy bonanza in the form of the India-Pakistan war, foreign policy successes, having more friends in the international system, temporary friends.
There are some gains.
Yes, तो उनके लिए कुछ situation पहले से बेहतर हुई है.
Silver lining है. Okay. Quickly, Anam, do you think there's something to be hopeful about?
I recently was listening to another podcast where this person was referring to a statement saying that losing hope is for the privileged. Right? And I think you need to remain hopeful as well. There is a lot of hope, especially when we see what's happening in South Asian region as well.
Yes.
Where we don't give enough credit to the youth and we say like, okay, this is very short term. This is the TikTok generation and that's it. But what we've seen with a lot of protests around Gaza as well, and where the youth has been mobilized. And I think it's the regeneration of the social contract that Yunus actually talked about as well. But it's a lot about like we need to be engaging citizens who have actually been disillusioned with politics, who have become apathetic towards politics. So Ran Mamdani's campaign is a testament to grassroots mobilization can be successful.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. You also have that happening in Pakistan where you have plenty smaller grassroots mobilizations that is actually Hukuk-e-Khalq being an example of it. That it is about that you can generate that activism, you can get people back to be politicized. And that comes with that there is that contract that exists between who's being elected and what citizens are getting at the receiving end. Of course, there is hope because I mean, if we lose hope, then it's very easy for us to derail. I think it's also like we're at a very precarious situation where you talk about, I mean, what happens, right? When we talk about whether there is civilian supremacy that exists, whether the separation of power is very much is there. And the lines are getting blurred by the day. So if we do not fight for it, or we actually say, well, nothing's going to change, I think that's just accelerating, derailing the country from a democratic path.
Thank you. Yes.
So,
any final thought?
I think
we're on.
We are moving backwards. We are regressing in terms of the state of democracy in the country. So, a political elite has conceded so much to non-political actors in the country that political process, as well as political institutions, political process meaning elections, and political institutions meaning parliament and other, for example, judiciary. So they have lost their credibility as well as functionality in terms of serving people's interest. So, and this regression has been fast-paced in the past few months through different amendments, as well as like where you see the formalization of institutional control over politics, as well as economy. For example, 18th Amendment was seen as a kind of a very progressive episode of promotion of democracy in the country, because it devolved power to the provinces, and health, education, and other subjects became provincial subjects. But now there are speculations that parts of 18th Amendment are going to be reversed as well through another amendment in the near future. So in that sense, it is kind of a kind of regression. However, what gives me hope is that there is this generational crisis, that the younger generation is not willing to accept this doubleness of power. For example, this idea that you can create this facade of democracy while exercising elite control or elite capture. So this crisis will keep on building, and this will force the elites in the country to not only renew the social contract, but to reorganize power, economic and political, in ways that are representative of people's interests. So that's what gives me hope that maybe 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road, we would see kind of this overhauling of the system, because system cannot function if
Unless
it is seen as illegitimate by the citizen it is supposed to serve.
Absolutely, yeah. The system cannot function exactly if it's continued to be perceived as illegitimate. Thank you so much. On this note, I'm going to wrap up again because of time. This was so much fun. I felt like it could go on and on. Thank you, Asma. Thank you, Anam. And thank you so much, Yunus, for joining us today. Thank you guys for watching this episode. Like each of them said, I think there are things to be hopeful about, but we also need to keep having these conversations. And so please do keep watching the podcast, and we'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you so much for watching.